Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith back with my picks for UFC 305. Of course, middleweight title on the line. The champion Dricus du Plessis in his first title defense versus two-time champion Israel Adesanya. All Africa grudge match here. But let's start at the bottom of the main card. Li Jinglong versus Carlos Prates. I don't know why they're opening the card with this one, because both guys are counterpunchers. Li Jinglong is really plotting. He's one of those guys, like, if you ever listen to my SiriusXM show when it was on, freaking Smiling Sam Alvey was like my kryptonite. Just stuck around in the UFC for so long. Liked the guy personally, but I couldn't stand his fighting style. And he always seemed to find a way to win just enough to stay in the UFC when I didn't think he was a UFC quality guy. Li Jinglong, very much in that category. Plotting, counter-striker, durable, tough, not that exciting, to say the least, and yet still somehow wins just enough to stay in the UFC. He beat a shot Santiago Ponzinibbio in Ponzinibbio's first fight back from injury. And then Muslim Salikov, able to beat him, another guy that is kind of plotting, that he was able to knock out in round two. But, you know, has lost every time it's been anyone decent. Lost to Daniel Rodriguez, Khamzat Chimaev, Neil Magny. Lost to Jake Matthews back in the day. That was a little while ago. But this idea that he just somehow just sticks around, and I don't think he's UFC level, really. Not that big for the weight class, all kinds of stuff. So Carlos Prates is one of those guys who's tall, accurate with his strike when he gets going. It just takes him a while to warm up. He's much like Li Jinglong, kind of a plotter, kind of a countering guy. Doesn't really, but when he unloads, he can get it done. That's kind of the difference here. He's a better finisher than Li Jinglong, who tends to walk you down a little bit. I got to go with Carlos Prates in this one. He's a gigantic favorite. I don't see why, really, Li Jinglong's in the UFC, to be perfectly honest with you. But on DraftKings right now, yeah, almost a 3-1 favorite. So, no, I'm sorry. You can make 3-1 on Li Jinglong. Carlos Prates is minus 375. Not going to make a lot of money, but I got to go with Carlos Prates in this one. The over is plus 120. Both guys are durable. I would go with the over. If you want to make some money, I would go with over at plus 120. Under is minus 154. I go with the over on this one, and I would take Carlos Prates. So, Tai Tuivasa, Yarinho Rozenstruik. Once again, we're getting two guys who are kind of in the same spot a little bit, where we've seen where these guys go against elite talent. They lose. They can be exciting. They can be fun. They can provide knockouts. In the case of Tai Tuivasa, he's a fan favorite with a shoey and all that stuff. But he's not a great fighter. He's in kind of the Mark Hunt category of, just hard-hitting fighter who Bloodsports can knock your head off, can knock out anyone on earth. But as soon as the fight becomes about how big is your toolkit? How many things can you do? He's going to lose that fight 9 out of 10 times. And that's what we've seen over and over in his career. Every time he got that step-up guy, came up short. And Derek Lewis is probably the biggest win of his career, but once again, another guy who is hard-hitting, big, but comparatively limited. Every time it's been Alexander Volkov, Cyril Gane, you see the difference. I always say about Arturo Gatti, if you're a boxing fan, Ray Boom Boom Sr., two guys who are in the Hall of Fame in boxing who I don't think should be in the Hall of Fame. When Arturo Gatti ever fought step-up guys, he didn't just lose. You saw the difference between Arturo Gatti and Oscar De La Hoya. Arturo Gatti and Floyd Mayweather. It wasn't close. It wasn't like, Angel Man Freddy, too. It wasn't like, oh, man, he's almost there. It was like, wow, those guys are a planet ahead of him. And that's a similar thing with Tai Tuivasa. It isn't just like, just a buck short. He is $1,000 short, right? He's just not quite there with those guys. And it's painfully obvious against elite talent what happens to the guy. But Rozenstruik is the same way. So Rozenstruik is a knockout artist. He's big for the weight class. He's a little more versatile, right? And he's from the Dutch kickboxing. He's from Suriname, that Dutch kickboxing style that is very prevalent. And good kicker, good clinch game. Knocked out Overeem late in the fight. In a fight that he was losing, by the way, to Alistair Overeem. But same problem. Every time they give him that step-up guy, he's falling short, usually in dramatic fashion. And Ngannou just wiped the floor with him. So it's this idea that two guys are kind of in the same spot in different ways, in that Tai Tuivasa is limited but more powerful. Rozenstruik's powerful as well, but a little bit more versatile. But when you look at the odds right now, and they are in a slump, to say the least. Tai Tuivasa has lost 4 in a row, I believe. And Rozenstruik, he has lost 3 out of 5. So they're both in slumps. And the 2 wins for Rozenstruik were Chris Daukaus and Shamil Gaziev. Okay, great. But Jalton Almeida, Alexander Volkov, Curtis Blades, Cyril Gane, Francis Ngannou, they didn't just beat him, they wiped him out. So both guys are kind of in a slump where if they lose, that might be it for them. But the difference here is when I look at the odds, Tai Tuivasa is a 2-1 dog against Rosenstrike. Rosenstrike minus 218, Tai Tuivasa plus 180 on DraftKings. Go with the money. Not a lot separating these guys. Right? You could say Rosenstrike's a little better because he's more versatile. Not 2-1 better. He's just as likely to get knocked out as Tuivasa is. So this is, to me, a coin flip fight, but you're not getting coin flip money. That's why, if you put a gun in my head, who's probably going to win? Yeah, I would give Rosenstrike a little edge. But at 2-1 money, you got to go with Tai Tuivasa. So it's a coin flip fight, but you're not getting coin flip money. And I go with Tai Tuivasa. The under on this is minus 188. So I would actually say it would probably be like 3-1 under, just because both these guys get knockouts so often. You take Tai Tuivasa, you're taking the under. I would say take Tai Tuivasa and the under on this one. But pretty much for the money. Moving on, Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker, pretty big dog in this one. Mateusz Gamrot minus 345. Daniel Hooker plus 275. But there's a reason for that. This is exactly the kind of fighter that Dan Hooker has trouble with. Inside guy, grappler, is going to push the pace, going to get inside his range. Dan Hooker said in the lead up to this fight, I fought stupid early in my career. He did. It's one of those things that I like to say, if I had that guy's build, I'd be undefeated. He's so tall for the weight class. He's so rangy, and yet he would rush forward and get in a brawl. You don't have to. You have a sniper rifle. You can shoot from a distance and wait for them to come in and make a mistake. But he never fought that way. It was always foot on the gas and attack, and he's not built for that. He says he's learned his lesson, but the problem is fighting, combat sports, MMA, whatever, is unforgiving. You can't start learning lessons late in your career after some really bad losses, Michael Chandler most notably. But it's this idea that now I've straightened up. Well, yeah, if you had done this maybe in the beginning of your career, sure, but you've been through some tough losses. You're on the back nine of your career either way, and now it's like I'm the leopard trying to change his spots. I'm not saying he won't do that or try to do that. My point is it won't be as successful considering what he's been through so far in his career. Make sense to everybody? So that's the problem I kind of have with this. Is, you're facing a guy who is, number one, on a great streak. Number two, style-wise is your kryptonite. Much more like Islam Makhachev, who took him down and submitted him like nothing, okay? Similar kind of, you're facing a similar guy right now, who's tenacious, who's confident, who has beaten Arman Tsarukyan, who's got a title shot in his future very, very soon. So everything lines up for Dan Hooker to lose this. And he is a good kickboxer. He's not necessarily the crack you with one kind of guy. What I call the shot stoppers, right? The uppercuts, the hooks that keep a grappler from dropping his head and going for a takedown. Chuck Liddell's so great at that sneaky uppercut that even if it misses, you go, oh man, and you hesitate to drop your head. He really isn't that guy. He's an outside guy. And his footwork has never been good enough to keep a really determined grappler at bay. Has he worked on it? Yes. I just think it's a little too late to fix this against a guy as good as Mateusz Gamrot because he's really, really good. So I got to go with Mateusz Gamrot. I think the odds are right on the money here, making him an almost 3-1 dog. So over under, the over is minus 270, which is likely, right? 3-round fight, the over's 2.5. The only way you're going to make money is take the under, which is plus 200. Sure, maybe Mateusz Gamrot takes him down and gets a submission early. Mateusz Gamrot, the only way you're going to make money is on the under for this one. There you go. KaraFrance, Steve ERS. This is an interesting one. That KaraFrance, once again, part of the theme here, not the Mateusz Gamrot fight, but the other ones are two fighters who are kind of in the same category. Both these guys are surprisingly powerful for the weight class. Both the guys are durable for the weight class. I liked Steve ERS, the way he got the Schnell knockout and then parlayed that into a title shot and did really well against the champ. Right? Had an excellent performance in that fight. But KaraFrance has taken on better talent, right? He's had more opportunities at the elite level. And for 125, this dude can crack. Now, ERS, of course, showed with that left hook, he does have precision. He can knock you out. He isn't, I would say, by nature, particularly heavy-handed. And the way I mean that, I've explained a couple times on this channel. Heavy-handed means I hit you with one of these, and you go down. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to turn it over. The hip isn't engaged, and it just flattens you because it's ugh, but it knocks you out. That is heavy-handedness. It's not a pretty punch. It's not beautiful, but it can knock you out. Erceg, the Matt Schnell knockout was right on target. Bang. KaraFrance can hit you with an uglier punch and knock you out or stun you. You can block half of it and still go, whoa, man. He's just heavy-handed. Also, the odds on this one, minus 175 for Steve ERS, plus 145 for KaraFrance. I think those odds are a little skewed, considering. So for KaraFrance, maybe they look at the 11 losses, right? Maybe it's the fact he's on a 2-fight skid. Yeah, okay, I believe all that stuff. But I think for the money, I think KaraFrance, it's, was it New Zealand versus Australia? I'm going with the upset here. I'm going with KaraFrance. That at 31 years old, he's got a little bit left in the tank to win what will probably be a striking battle with Steve ERS. So I got to go with KaraFrance and a little bit of an upset. On to the main event, Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. My previous video dealt with kind of the bad blood involved in this fight, how real it is, what it's based on. What I said, if you didn't watch, is basically there's a difference between saying I'm African and somebody who has to deal with being African all the time, and obviously African, which Israel Adesanya is. I think it's the heart of the issue. And all these colonial factors, I won't even get into it. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts, right, the X's and O's, Izzy's in a very tough spot. Trying to come out, win a title a third time, very, very difficult to do. Had a long time off. And a lot of people online, when I've talked about Izzy, they like the time off. They think that'll kind of reset him and he'll come back better. But there's a lot of X factors. We haven't seen you since a huge upset loss in a fight that you looked flat, but I really believe Sean Strickland, Dricus du Plessis said it, and I believe it. Sean Strickland looked really good that night, and his style is just a tough fit for Izzy. And so he looked flat, but isn't one of those like, oh, he had an off night, and you can write off Sean Strickland's accomplishments. I don't believe that. I believe Sean Strickland has a tricky style where he does very well against an Israel Adesanya, and just it was the perfect storm that night. But this was a champion who was fairly dominant, coming off a loss that no one expected, took time off. A lot of X factors here. Do you have the motivation to keep going? Do you have the will to get back and climb the mountain a third freaking time? That is hard. So there are a lot of things kind of working against Izzy, but he's a very talented fighter. Well, let's talk about things working against Dricus du Plessis. As I said, talking about Dustin Poirier, I said the blue-collar, hard-working fighter who isn't great in any one area, right, and doesn't have any particular physical gift, rarely do they become champions. And when they do, they don't have long runs. Generally, they have short runs as champion. Look at Michael Bisping. Probably the prime example. Got one controversial win over Dan Henderson, right? Frankie Edgar is kind of the exception to the rule, but people forget about Frankie Edgar because those were all rematches. He rematched BJ Penn. Then he fought Gray Maynard twice, a guy he had already fought before. So he won 2. But it's the idea that and had a title for 3 because one of them was a draw. But so 3 title defenses. The rule generally is the blue collar guy who wins a title doesn't hold it very long. Look at Sean Strickland, lost in his first title defense to Dricus du Plessis. Robert Whittaker, 185, never defended the title. So there's this idea that guys like Dricus du Plessis typically don't hold the title very long. Unless you have something that kind of puts you over the top against the rest of the field, it's just hard. There's just so much parity, right? It's like, being a returning Super Bowl champ. The NFL has a lot of parity. It's hard to do that. So that works against Dricus du Plessis. His style is pretty basic. It's good. He's an excellent fighter. He deserves to be champion. But his style, it's not like they got to go to the gym and go, God, what are we going to do against Dricus du Plessis? You know what he's going to do. You know how he's going to do it, essentially. He's much more Robert Whittaker than he is Sean Strickland, who was funky and tricky and does the Philly shell and does a lot of stuff a lot of fighters don't do. So Dricus doesn't do that. Does have a good gas tank. Is full of confidence right now. Is well-rounded. Can do a lot of things. Not great at any one thing. And the bad blood that I went over in my previous video, I think benefits Izzy just a little bit. Because why? When you want to be a champion a third time, you have to find the motivation to really bring the best out of you and really get those hard reps in camp and those hard sparring sessions, all the stuff you need to do Can you really do it? He doesn't like Dricus du Plessis at all. There's just enough bad blood that I think will motivate. I don't think he'll get in his head. I don't think he'll go out there, I'm going to knock this guy's head off. I think he does the exact opposite, honestly. But I think it motivates Izzy enough to put in the hard training, and he wins the title again. That's what I think. And that's very rare in this business. I'm going with Israel Adesanya. I think it will be a decision. Right now, last I looked, it was a coin flip fight. Let me look right now. Look at DraftKings. It is Dricus du Plessis minus 102, Israel Adesanya minus 118. So basically a coin flip. The over on this is plus 100. Yes, take the over. Thank God. Now, the over is 4.5 rounds. I do think this goes to decision. Neither guy is a fantastic. I mean, they have finishes. They do. But Izzy tends to be kind of up and down. Either it's Paulo Costa and blows you away, or it's Yoel Romero and you're like, oh, my God. Right? The Jared Cannonier fight. Whew. He has this tendency to do that. Dricus du Plessis knocked out Robert Whittaker, but won distance with Sean Strickland. A lot of times he goes the distance. I think this one goes the distance. I think it's a very boring tactical fight where he just fights smart, and his ring savvy is a little too much for Dricus du Plessis. I will check in probably Tuesday. I'm calling ADCC this weekend, so I'm not going to be back home until probably to film anything until Tuesday. Appreciate you. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. I'll see you soon.